This is a project file on an urban renewal scheme at the entrance to Yehud-Monosson. 6 buildings of 13 and 14 stories, 444 apartments, in place of the 114 homes that stand there today. Everything you are about to see is a computer render because nothing is built. We call it Yehud-001, our own reference, so this stays a file about a scheme rather than an advertisement. We act for buyers on projects like this one, so the useful thing we can hand you is not a brochure. It is the questions we would put to this developer before letting a client of ours sign anything. 5 numbers, 444 apartments, 6 buildings, 13 to 14 stories, 114 existing homes replaced, which is roughly a 4-fold increase in density on the same piece of land. Now, this is a small scheme by the standards of Israeli urban renewal, and that is a point in its favor rather than against it. But what actually decides whether it is worth its price are 2 things that are not on the block at all: a light rail line that is not finished and an airport that is. Start with this one because it is the most honest picture the developer has published and the one most people scroll past. Look at what is around the new buildings. The existing blocks either side unchanged. The roundabout, the petrol station, the fast food sign, the flag bunting strung across the road. This is not a new quarter. It is 6 tall buildings inserted into an ordinary street that otherwise stays exactly as it is. And that is what urban renewal in a small commuter town actually looks like. What is being built is 444 apartments across 6 buildings of 13 and 14 stories, with commercial space, public buildings, open areas, landscaped gardens and cycle routes joining the town's wider network. Notice that the 6 buildings are all roughly the same height. Unlike a tower scheme, there is no premium penthouse tier and no cheap podium tier, which makes the price list far easier to read. Differences between apartments come down to floor, aspect, and layout. So if 2 similar apartments are priced very differently, ask what it is you are not being told. One technical note on the same set of pictures: the blank white blocks you can see behind the buildings are placeholder geometry standing in for the existing town. They are not part of this scheme, and they are not a promise about what gets built there. It is worth knowing that before you read anything into them. Here is the real advantage of a small scheme. On the 11 building schemes we file, phasing is everything, and somebody always moves in beside a live building site. 6 buildings is small enough to be delivered in a single program. That would be a genuine advantage, so confirm it in writing rather than assume it. Are all 6 permitted, and are they being built together? This is a pinui-binui scheme: evacuate and build. The existing residents are bought out, the old blocks come down, and roughly 4 times as much goes up on the same land. The original owners receive a new apartment, and the extra apartments are sold on the open market, which is what pays for the whole exercise. 444 in place of 114 is roughly 4 to 1, which is at the higher end for a site this size. That density is exactly what makes the scheme viable. Nothing gets rebuilt without the extra apartments to fund it. For you as a buyer, it means more neighbors, more cars, and a service charge shared across more apartments. Question 1. The light rail. The scheme is presented as sitting beside a planned station on a new line, and if and when that line opens, a station at the entrance to Yehud genuinely changes what this address is worth. That is the investment case here, and it is a good one. But a planned station is a plan. Get the current opening date from the operator's published program rather than from the sales office. Establish whether the route and the station location are finally approved or still capable of moving. And then work out how much of today's asking price is already paying for it. If the premium is already in the price, you are buying upside that somebody else has already banked. Question 2, and this is the one that matters most. Yehud-Monosson sits immediately beside Ben Gurion Airport. Aircraft noise here is not a rumor, and it is not a detail. It is a defining characteristic of the town, and it cannot be checked from abroad. It varies enormously by street, by height, and by which runway configuration is in use. It changes through the day, and it is different again at night. No brochure, no render, and no map will tell you any of that, and nobody selling you an apartment is going to raise it. So we would go and listen on the site at the floor level you were buying at 3 different times of day with the windows open and a microphone running, and we would send you the recording. If you buy here without doing that, you are buying the one risk you could most easily have checked. Neither of those is a reason not to buy. Yehud is a well-run town with good schools, 10 minutes from the airport, inside the Route 1 and Route 4 corridors, and renewal is exactly how a street like this one improves. Those two questions simply decide whether this specific address is worth its specific price. So, the 7 things to establish before you sign. The scheme is selling, which makes these contract questions rather than planning questions. 2 of them are specific to this address, and they come first. Check 1. The aircraft noise measured rather than described. Have somebody stand on the site at the floor level you are buying at several times of day and once after dark, and get it recorded rather than summarized. This is check 1 for a reason. Check 2. What the light rail program actually says. The operator's published opening date rather than the one on the brochure, and whether the station location is finally approved. Check 3. Whether all 6 buildings are permitted and built together. Which of them hold permits today, and does anything come in a later phase? On a 6-building site, the answer should be simple, so get it in writing anyway. Check 4. The delivery date. Not the date in the brochure, not the date the sales office gives you, the date in the document you sign. For contracts signed from the 7th of July 2022, the statutory ladder runs like this. Nothing for the first month. 1 month's rent for months 2 to 4. 1.25 times for months 5 to 10. 1.5 times from month 11 onwards. A contract with no fixed delivery date at all is the clause that costs money. Check 5, your security. Under the sale of apartments, Assurance of Investments Law of 1974, no more than 7% of the price may be taken from you before a prescribed security is in place. In practice, that is a bank guarantee. Get the document itself and check that it names you and the correct apartment. Check 6, linkage. The first 20% of the price cannot be index linked at all, and no more than half of each later payment may be, so at most 40% of the total is exposed. Linkage stops at the contractual delivery date rather than at handover, which is exactly why an unfixed date costs you twice. And check 7, how apartments are actually being allocated. Press coverage at the launch of this scheme described a lottery. Establish exactly how allocation works now, what entering it commits you to, and what happens to your deposit if you are allocated something you did not want. Separately from all 7, purchase tax. An Ola using Regulation 12A, an Israeli resident buying a single home, and a foreign resident all pay very different amounts on the same apartment. Establish which ladder you are on before you agree a price, not after. Between the buildings, the render shows a pedestrian route with a food truck, benches, and shade, full of people on a perfect afternoon. 2 questions. Who owns that ground when the scheme completes? Is it public land or the residents jointly? And who is contracted to maintain it? Because that answer arrives on your monthly bill. And from above, the same idea, cafes, play areas, planting. What actually decides whether it ends up looking like this is not the drawing. It is whether the commercial units let. So ask what is signed and to whom, because a parade of empty units is a very different address from the one in the picture. A word on the town. Yehud-Monosson is a small, well-run commuter town of around 30,000 people, east of Tel Aviv and immediately north of the airport. Good schools, a quiet family, middle-class character, and inside the Route 1 and Route 4 corridors, which is why people who work in Tel Aviv and around the airport live here. One practical consequence of being a small town. Yehud is not one of the 18 cities the Central Bureau of Statistics publishes averages for. There is no official average transacted price and no official average rent. So any price or yield comparison you are shown here is built from listings or from the seller's own numbers. Ask for signed comparable sales and signed comparable leases from the surrounding streets instead. And the Anglo point, since it is why most people watch this channel. There is a small English-speaking presence in Yehud, but this is not Ra'anana, Modi'in, or Netanya, and it is not going to become them. Yehud is an Israeli town. That suits some families very well and others not at all, and it is far better discovered now than after you have signed. There is exactly one interior in this set of pictures. Note what is outside the window: trees, open sky, drawn from a height, with no neighboring block, and of course no aircraft. The furniture is not included, and the finishes were chosen by a visualizer rather than by your contract. The document that binds is the technical specification, the Mefrat Techni, which lists the brands, the tolerances, and the finishes you are actually buying, and where it and the render differ, the specification wins. And note the one thing no render of this site can ever show you, because it is not visual. The sound. Everything else in this file can be checked on paper. That cannot. Everything here comes from the developer's own published project information and from contemporaneous press coverage of the launch and the unit counts. Some of it will have moved since, which is why we check rather than repeat. And take Israeli legal advice on the contract and on the securities before you pay anything at all, including a reservation deposit. So here is the offer. We will stand on Ashkenazi Street and record the noise at 3 different times of day and send it to you. We will get you the permit position and what the light rail program actually says. And we will read the contract with you before you sign it. That is the whole service. And on this scheme, it is worth more than every other paragraph put together.